In the morning light, the cameras start to roll. Yuba-Sutter alive, watch the stories unfold. Tune in on Tuesday, the news comes alive. Yuba Agency, making sure we thrive. Yuba City Council, with Marysville in view. Yuba-Sutter live, it's the truth that comes through. Union on Tuesday, the news comes alive. Yuba Agency, making sure we thrive. Yuba City Council, with Marysville in view. Yuba-Sutter live, it's the truth that comes through. Yuba-Sutter live, it's the truth that comes through.
Yuba-Sutter.live's local government live streams are presented by Plumas Lake Self-Storage in Plumas Lake, where lifelong local residents are helping other residents keep things safe, providing indoor storage units, outdoor RV and vehicle parking, moving supplies, and Penske truck rentals. Details at plumaslakeselfstorage.com.
All right, thank you. Do we have any public comment? None?
We do not.
Okay, nobody hands up on the Zoom? Okay.
No virtual.
Consent items, approval of consent items.
I'll move to approve.
Motion's been made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. Thank you. Discussion items. Receive update on the ARC Spillway project. Willie and John.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair Messick. So today we are going to receive an update on our ARC Spillway project. We've been working on this project diligently for since 2018, but the project concept was created following the 1997 floods and has been in development since 2001. There's no action today. Today is just an update. Is an update because we wanted to take advantage of this board meeting to remind you of all of the work that is going into planning, engineering, design, and permitting of the ARC Spillway. As you know, we're seeking outside funding, grants and other sources of funds to help pay for the ARC Spillway. Today, we don't have a finance plan included. We do have a range of cost estimates included. But what we wanted to do is take today about an hour, a half an hour presentation and about a half an hour of questions and comments to remind the board of this significant effort. That way, in the next few months, when we do have our finance plan ready and we do get external commitments for funding, we can bring a finance plan back to the board. So today is just an update on where we are with the ARC Spillway and opportunity for discussion. So what we'll do today is we'll go through the history of the ARC Spillway. We'll also talk about the process for design and the elements that were modified through the design process, where we are in design and what the next steps are. Before we get into it, I'd like to introduce the engineers and staff that will be helping in the presentation. So first off, John James, our Director of Resource Planning. Second, Dave Gutierrez, engineer at GEI. And third, Tom Engler, engineer at MBK. All three of them have been instrumental in this design, amongst many others, as you are well aware. At this point, I would like to play slide 2, which is a video that is just a summary of the ARC Spillway, and then we'll kick it over to Dave Gutierrez to get into the history. Before we start the video, before we get into it,
narrow bands of
I'd like you to ask technical questions that are specific to slides as we go through it, just for clarification. But if you have policy-related overall type questions, that's what we have the second half hour for, is to get into the policy level stuff. But if there's technical stuff related to a slide, please ask as we go through. Okay, thanks, Mandy, sorry.
concentrated water vapor that produce major amounts of rainfall and snow and are responsible for up to half of California's annual precipitation. Atmospheric rivers begin in the warm waters of the Pacific, where water evaporates into the air. When this humid air meets a Pacific storm, the water vapor is concentrated and driven toward the coast, becoming a fire hose of precipitation. Once the atmospheric river reaches the coastal mountains and the inland Sierra, the collision squeezes additional rain and snow from the system. Atmospheric rivers can be beneficial, replenishing reservoirs and keeping us out of drought. But too many, too close together, can create flooding. Yuba Water Agency is working with partners at Scripps Institution of Oceanography's Center for Western Weather and Water Extremes to better understand atmospheric rivers in our region in order to improve weather forecasts and the flows. We can then use the space in the reservoir to hold back flows when the storm is strongest. The ability to reduce the amount of water on a levee system during the peak of a big storm can significantly lower flood risk. The reduction in peak flows decreases the probability of reaching or surpassing levee flood stages, as well as the likelihood of overtopping levees. But perhaps more importantly, it reduces the likelihood of seepage significantly, and that is key to levee safety. In fact, most levee failures in California, including the two most recent floods in Yuba County in 1986 and 1997, have been caused by excessive seepage during an atmospheric river storm. Here's how reducing the amount of water on the levee helps. The higher the water level on a levee, the more hydrostatic force is putting pressure on the base of that levee. This is the same phenomenon that makes you feel pressure on your eardrums as you go deeper underwater. As you swim down to the bottom of a pool that's 4 feet deep, there's not much pressure. But when you swim down to the bottom of a pool that's 8 feet deep, you experience more hydrostatic pressure pushing on your body. That same type of pressure can push and wear on levees. And if seepage finds a weak spot in the levee, the hydrostatic pressure will push flows through and erode the interior of the levee, eventually causing it to fail. So if the water in the river is 30 feet deep, the pressure at the bottom is much greater than if the water is only 20 feet deep, and that pressure decreases as the water level gets lower. In fact, some of the levees in our area are among the tallest in the state, so there's a ton of pressure on them in a storm when the channel is filling up. And every foot that we decrease the water level can result in a dramatic reduction of the pressure on the levee. So, building the Ark spillway and implementing forecast-informed reservoir operations at New Bullard's Bar will lower the downstream water levels, which reduces the pressure on the levees and the probability of seepage, thereby decreasing flood risk and significantly improving public safety. Find out more about this important public safety project at yubawater.org.
Wow. Wait, oh, there we go. Okay, how's that?
You have a comment?
Yeah, I was just wow, that was really impressive, especially the voiceover. Whoever did that was amazing.
Oh, yeah, so we wanted to show that's kind of the general kind of overview video, obviously, of the Ark spillway that we'll get out on our social media after today's presentation. But we wanted to show it to you just to kind of give you if that's our 30-second elevator speech. But what you're going to hear now is the more like the 30-minute detailed presentation with an opportunity for questions and answers. So with that, I'll kick it over to Dave Gutierrez, engineer at GEI. And Dave's been instrumental in planning and engineering of the Ark spillway and is very experienced in flood control and dam safety in the state of California. He'll give you all the details of his credentials here, but take it away, Dave Gutierrez.
Great, thank you very much, and that was an outstanding video. Again, my name is Dave Gutierrez. I'm with GEI Consultants. I've been with GEI for the last 8 years. Prior to that, I spent 37 years at the Department of Water Resources. Most of the time was with the Division of Safety of Dams. I was the chief of DSOD when I left the Department of Water Resources. I was also the deputy director of Flood Safe, trying to get that program going to improve the levees. Also ran the development of the regulations for the groundwater program, as well as the regulations for the Prop 1, where we're building some large reservoirs throughout the state. So today, what we'd like to do is discuss the Ark spillway. As you know, one of the founding objectives of Yuba Water Agency was to continually improve the flood management system for the residents of Yuba County. And that's exactly what this project's all about. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to talk a little bit about some background first, most of it, which I believe you probably already know. So forgive me if I'm repeating some of the stuff you already know. We'll talk a bit about how the Central Valley flood control system, the levees and the dams kind of work together. Levee upgrades that have already been taking place, which are absolutely critical. Then we'll get into how did we get here? How did we get to the Ark Spillway? How did we go through an alternative analysis, et cetera? And then we'll finish up with the benefits of the Ark Spillway. As Willie had indicated, please interrupt me at any time during the presentation. I'm more than happy to try to answer any questions that you may have as we go along. So this is one of the slides where I think you probably know this better than me, but flooding in Yuba County has been certainly an absolutely critical issue. And I think you saw that on the video here today. You have a situation where you have the west coast of California, you have the Pacific Ocean, and you have these high, tall mountains that you have to deal with. And so once in a while what happens is it's set up and you get these warm rivers of water coming into California, pounding those Sierras. You got these steep slopes and they're coming down and they're hitting your valley so suddenly. And this has happened for forever here in California. And as folks started moving into California in the mid 1800s, they start trying to build things like levees to try to tame that river, but we're never really going to tame it. The best we can do is try to manage it. We can't control that river. We can try to manage it. And so you saw some devastating floods. Some of you might have lived through them in 1986 and in 1997 were some of the most devastating. You had $500 million and $300 million of damage. That doesn't count the loss of lives, which is, can't put a price on that, as well as the socioeconomic and environmental impacts of these failures. So that's really what it's all about. That's what we're trying our hardest to prevent in the future. That's what this Ark Spillway is all about. Never want to talk about flooding in terms of averaging, because there's no such thing as average flooding. We don't know if we're going to get a flood this decade. We don't know if we're going to get a flood this year. But when you look at the history of floods here in Yuba County, you get some pretty big floods. And in fact, they're usually about a couple a decade, but there is no such thing as averaging. Again, just because we had one last year doesn't mean we're not, or doesn't mean we're going to have another one this year. And in the future, it actually could get worse. We're most likely going to get floods that are bigger than these historical floods we've seen. Climate is changing, and there's certainly debate about how's that going to change the precipitation. But the one thing scientists do agree, the storms are going to get warmer. And what we have in the past is we had these snow events come, and that acts as a reservoir. That doesn't produce much runoff, but it's when these warm storms or these atmospheric rivers come, that's when we get into trouble. That's probably going to get to worse, and that's what it's predicted over the next several decades. Now, I want to talk a little bit about risk. Risk is probably one of the most, I think the public doesn't understand risk at all, what that term means. And it's partly because of us engineers. We use this term called 100-year level of protection, 200-year level of protection. That's just a horrible term. And something when I was running FloodSafe, we tried to avoid that term because we'd go out in the public and we'd do nothing but confuse the public. They would say something like, well, I don't have to worry about that. If it's once every 200 years, I'm not going to live 200 years, so it's really not my problem. That's not what risk means. Risk is actually the probability of the failure and the consequence of the failure. And these two balancing acts are what's really talking about risk. So if your consequences are very, very large, you want a very low probability. If your consequences aren't too large, you could live with a higher probability event. And so that's really important to understand. And a really simple term that I use is if you go and you play roulette once a year, your odds of winning roulette are 1 in 38 if you go this year. You go again next year, it's still 1 in 38. It had nothing to do whether you won or lost or whatever the previous year. Your odds are 1 in 38 every year. And so when we talk about 1 in 100, 1 in 200, 1 in 500, that's what we're talking about. The probability this year, if you had a 1 in 100 year level of protection, that just means you have a 1 in 100 chance of this happening this year. So we'll try to keep that tracked as we kind of go through this. when I was working with FloodSafe, you know, we're dealing with these levees, and we were given the legislation to make sure the urban levees are protected by about a 1 in 200 annual probability. That's what we were given with. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's good. That's really a practicality thing. That's really all that was really going to be achievable with the levee system that we had. But we really should be trying to go beyond that as citizens of the state of California. That's just the requirement of the law. In fact, when we deal with dams, I was the chief of dam safety. When we talk about the smallest dams in California, we start at designing those dams at 1 in 1,000. When we get to the big dams like Bullard's Bar, we like to see probabilities of 1 in 1,000,000 or so. And that's because the consequence of those failures are so tremendous. We need those probabilities to be as minuscule as possible. So when we were developing FloodSafe, our idea was we want to buy down the risk. And that's what I think Yuba's charge is. That's what your founding objective was. And that's what you're actually been doing over the years. In fact, in 1998, you set a goal to try to increase your flood protection as much as possible, with the goal out there of 1 in 500 annual exceedance. That doesn't mean you'll necessarily meet it, but you always got to be striving for that. And in fact, the probability and the consequence, remember, those are not static. They're going to be changing with time. So as people build more houses, that consequence is going up. As your infrastructure falls apart and maybe not maintained, that probability is going down. So you always got to be paying attention to this as you go through your process of understanding risk. And so remember, your job and our job is to try to buy down the risk as practically as possible, knowing that money is not infinite. Now, it's really important to understand how the system works together, because the levees are not alone, the dams are not alone, the bypasses are not alone. It works as a system. So what's the dam's job in flood management? The dam's job is to knock off that peak. So when that atmospheric river comes in, it could produce 500,000 CFS of water. Your levees can't handle that. So the reservoir's job is to knock off that peak, lower that peak flow from 300 or 500 down to 50,000 maybe. That's what your new Bullard's Bar dam does. In fact, I think the highest flow that dam's seen is 50,000 CFS. It's doing its job. It's working with the levees downstream. Your levees downstream, unfortunately, is really the weak point of the system. And you're going to hear about all the great improvements that have been made, and they have been absolutely critical to the safety of the folks of this community. But that's still probably the weak link. And if you think about it, why is it a weak link? Well, one, they were built in the 1800s. They have been improved, but they were still constructed in the 1800s. And then the site itself. So when you look at a dam, you've got a kind of a finite site. It's not too large. You could actually investigate it and understand it. When we're talking about levees, they're miles and miles and miles long. So it's really hard to understand every single point on that levee. And so it remains to be the weak link. Now levees can fail in a number of ways. It could overtop, they could erode, but in Northern California, really the levees are having problems with underseepage. And you saw that in that video. What is underseepage? That pressure gets too great. It starts putting pressure underneath the foundation of the dam. That starts moving particles, and if those particles start moving, you get a failure. And that's what we actually seen in things like 1986 with the Linda Levee failure, and in 1997 where the pressures just got too high. And remember, when we talk about pressure and height of water against that levee, pressure is exponential to height. So every foot you go, 3 feet doesn't just mean it's going to be just a little bit. It's going to be exponentially larger in terms of pressure. So that's what we're trying to prevent. Keep the water off that levee and keep that pressure down as much as we possibly can. Now let's get into the Arc Spillway and how you got here. So I think Yuba I owe Yuba congratulations. They did a very, very methodical approach to selecting this Arc Spillway. This didn't happen overnight. And in fact, in 1998, there was a board meeting after the 1997, and I'm reading this, so some of you might have actually lived this, but in 1997, there was a board meeting where you all said we need to improve our flood management. General manager came through, start laying out some goals. Let's try to improve our flood management as much as possible. Gave the direction to the staff. The staff moved forward and tried to figure out, okay, how do we do that? And there is a methodology to do that. And I'm not going to go through every step here, but that's exactly what you did. You started with alternatives analysis. You start weeding out projects. You start figuring out feasibility level studies, which is more sophisticated than alternative analysis. You start doing technical analysis, and you just go through this process. You grind through it. And for the last 20 years, that's what you actually did. And as projects surface, they surface because of a variety of reasons. You select the best project to move forward, and you score it as you go. And that's actually what you did. And so you actually had about 33 alternatives back in 2001 with an alternatives report that you wrote. And you brainstormed these things. You came up with every possible idea of how you could continually improve flood management for your citizens. And you did that by selecting all these different alternatives. And some of them fall out. They sound like a good alternative, but for a variety of reasons at the time, they may fall away. And a good example would be raising levees. Raising levees sounds like a good idea. I'm a geotechnical engineer. That gets me a bit nervous. And the reason it gets me a bit nervous as a geotechnical engineer is every time you raise the levee, you're adding more pressure on that levee. And it's kind of interesting. There's a history book that was written quite a while ago, and it was talking about the 1850s to 1870s and how they were arguing whether we should have bypasses or whether we should just increase the height of the levees. And the Corps of Engineers, the head engineer, wanted bypasses. He didn't want those levees too high. Well, it's lucky he won, because now we don't have 50-foot high levees that would have failed a lot more frequently than they're failing now. We had a bypass system. So he knew you got to keep the head off the levee, and he won that argument, and that's what we have. Other problems with raising the levees is there's what's called hydraulic impacts. So again, back in the 1800s, the whole reason we have a system is one farmer would build a levee, he'd build it a certain height, and then the neighbor would build it a little higher, and then back and forth, and you're not getting anywhere. When you're saving yourself and reducing your risk, you're causing the risk to go higher to your neighbor. That's why the whole system got implemented, and that's why raising levees, although should be looked at, and in fact, things have changed, and you guys are looking at it again in a 2023 study. That's why it's not that easy to do. It seems like it's a good idea, but it falls out quickly. Same thing with things like bypasses. Bypasses are absolutely critical for the success of flood management here in the state of California. Building a bypass today is going to be a lot different than it was back in the 1800s. And that's just because things like land acquisition, environmental challenges, that just drives up costs. And so when you get to it, it sounds great, but then it starts reducing its score. And other projects like a site that you already have, like New Bullard's Bar, it surfaces to the top quickly because the cost of that is much, much easier to compete with things like new sites and bypasses. So you kind of went through this analysis. Again, it narrows down, and you score it, and you score it based on, how quickly could this thing be built? Is there going to be support for it? What are the impacts? What are the costs? All that kind of comes up, and then you get these total scores. And what happens is over time, your best project starts to surface to the top, and that's actually what happened here. And in the alternatives analysis in 2002, as it's continued to raise, it became more clear that the site at New Bullard's Bar was probably going to be your best project. That's the one that started moving forward, but still studies were being conducted to ensure that's true. That could be used in conjunction with other things. And you're going to hear a little bit, or you did hear a little bit about FERO. Operate the reservoir a little bit smarter than we had decades ago, because we're better at what we do in terms of understanding forecasting and things like that. So we could use this, and we could take these things and work these two different types of projects together to increase flood management. Now, once you select an alternative, you're still not done. You're always going back and forth, and you're always reevaluating. That's actually what was done here in or New Bullard's Bar Dam. When it was originally, the concept originally came forward, it was thought, okay, this won't be too complicated. We'll put something in the left abutment. We'll put a spillway in the left abutment. You have this big rotten knoll over there in the left abutment. It will not affect the existing dam, but it makes sense to let's just pound a hole through there. Let's build a tunnel and let's just build the project that way. Well, we start getting into it and we didn't get too far and realized that probably isn't going to be the greatest idea. And so what we did is we developed what's called a value engineering workshop. So you have the design team, they're rethinking things and figuring out what's a better way to build this same thing. And then we invite independent folks who have nothing to do with the project, come in, look at it with a fresh set of eyes and come to a solution that may be better. And in fact, both the design team and the independent consultants came to the same conclusion. The tunnel was not going to work. It would have worked, but it would have cost a lot of money. It's just too complicated hydraulics. It was going to deal with a coffer dam that I'll explain later. And so we decided the best approach is just to excavate out that rock and put in a structure similar to the structure that you actually have right now.
Dave, can I interrupt it? How did we arrive at the 31.5 feet lower?
The 31.5 feet, great question, is there is a you're going to hear some analysis that were conducted by Tom's group, and that's the hydrology aspect of it. So what is the advantage of the arc spill? Remember, I talked about knocking off the peak. What we got to do is we got to knock off the peak of the storm. So as this 300,000 CFS comes in, or whatever the number is, how do we store that? Well, right now, we've got a spillway that's pretty close to the top, not real close, but pretty close to the top. Let's knock that spillway down and provide more storage where we can get the water out quickly when we see an oncoming storm and then capture that big peak coming in. And so analysis were conducted to figure out what is the most optimal solution for providing the best flow downstream. And Tom's going to cover a little bit about that, but it was that back and forth analysis to figure out this is how much volume we need in order to provide this much flood protection downstream through that levee system. So Tom will cover that, but yeah, Willie?
So there's a GEI alternatives analysis from 2018, and Dave just talked about what is that volume we need to move to protect downstream. And what we looked at is we looked at the flood of record, the 1997 flood, and the concept we talked about was why don't we design a spillway or at the time a lower outlet that can pass something slightly larger than the 1997 flood in total without using the primary spillway. I think, and John can probably correct me on this, I think we have something like a 65,000 CFS capacity at our flood pool, so at 1917 feet in elevation. All that may not mean anything to you, but what I'll say is there were 4 sizes and elevations analyzed in the 2018 report, and the cost benefit lean towards this 31.5 feet lower with a 65,000 foot capacity at flood pool. That was one of the best cost benefit. We looked at going a little higher in elevation, so let's call it, I don't remember the number, let's just call it 25 feet instead of 31 feet. It was cheaper, but it didn't provide as much benefit. I think we looked at some that were even larger, but at some point you have the law of diminishing returns and it just gets too expensive and then you don't necessarily get the benefit. So that's the process we went through. We can provide you with that 2018 alternatives analysis, but everything we've done since then had been premised on that elevation and that size capacity.
And my colleague Tom will cover that a little bit better than I'm covering here right now. Okay, and so finishing off on the value engineering. Another question, please.
Also in that calculation, if I remember right, it was 1.5 to 2 feet of the lower elevation on the levees.
Yeah.
Is that lower elevation from the flood design or just from what basis?
Yeah, you'll see these graphs coming up, and it is based on the flood design. So it's that part's somewhat linear in the sense that no matter what flood, you're going to lower it. And as you know, that's different at different places along the levee, but it could be 1 feet, 2 feet, and 3 feet at different locations for different storms. But you're right, that's at the flood level. You're going to save that many feet at these particular.
The reason I asked the question because it seems like there's levees up in the Hallwood area that the water has never even hit the base of the levees. So 1.5 feet there isn't an advantage, but when you get down to Marysville, Yuba City, then 1.5 feet.
That's absolutely correct. That's absolutely correct that the height of the water against the levees is different at different locations. We measured it at different spots to see where it's going to be. We looked at some critical spots, and I think Tom's going to cover
your study didn't tell where the spots were. That's why.
No, we felt again, Tom will cover this, but there was critical spots that are, Marysville is obviously very critical. The point where the feather and the Yuba come together, that's a really important point. And so we looked at these different points to see how much this would affect those different points.
But that wasn't in the report, the different spots. I'm wondering if we should have that information.
I thought so, but I'm going to let Tom cover that. He'll be able to answer that better than I can. He did that study. So let's see, closing up on value engineering, really what drove the cost is, and this wasn't realized, and this is the whole point that I'm trying to make, is you're always kind of going back and forth and you're taking a step back to make sure you're going in the right direction. That's what value engineering is all about. We were going to have to build an extremely expensive cofferdam with this first alternative of the tunnel. And that cofferdam itself was going to be $70 million. That's where we just stopped and said, okay, this isn't going to work. And now we're able to use the natural cofferdam for this new system that we're going to construct, because we're able to put the outlet structure a little bit further downstream. So that's just how value engineering works. It was very successful here. And as a result of that, I think we got a much, much more efficient and the best project going on. So now the design, where are we in the design? So this board, I think I remember coming here in about 2018 when we started talking about this. And it was this board that approved to move forward with the design of the ARC spillway. And that's exactly what we did. And so there's a lot of analysis that are being completed as a part of that. You do very complex hydraulic mathematical modeling. We did physical modeling in Utah to actually make sure that all the numbers are calculated correctly. You do finite element analysis of the structures themselves to make sure all the engineering and everything's safe. And when you do this, we actually had 3 different organizations look over our shoulder to make sure we're doing it right. So first is the California Division of Safety of Dams. That's my old organization. So my old organization is reviewing our work to make sure that the design is going to be safe to the folks, to the public downstream. You have the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. You are currently relicensing your project, but they also have a dam safety branch. And that dam safety branch is also reviewing the project to make sure the dam is safe. And then we have a board. So FERC actually required a board of 3 members. These are experts in the field of hydraulics and hydrology, geotechnical, seismic, and construction. And these folks overlook our shoulder to make sure that, in fact, we're designing it as well. And so you do this at like a 10%, 30%, 60%, 90%, and 100% design. So that's kind of how the review actually takes place. And we are pretty much at the finish line. We've completed the design. We have to cross a few T's and dot a few I's. We had the final comments from DSOD and FERC. FERC had really no technical comments, a few process comments. DSOD had 1 technical comment. The rest were fairly minor. We easily can take care of those, and that's not going to be a critical path. So we'll definitely have this design probably finished early in the year of 2025. So the project itself, what is it? There's a few components to it. First, in the brown area here, upstream of the dam is what we call the approach channel. There's really not much to that. This is where the cofferdam is going to be placed. So there's a rock knob there. We're not going to take it out. We're first going to construct downstream. After we're done with the construction downstream and we have the control structure finished, we take out that knob and we put in this approach channel, which is basically just allowing the water from the reservoir to get to this new control structure. And that's what you see in the middle here. This is the control structure. I got a better view of it on the next slide. And that's what actually controls the water. You're going to see some gates and how that works. And then you have a spillway chute and then a discharge channel. So if you could imagine what you have out there today, you have a structure a concrete spillway, and then you have a discharge channel. This is going to be the same way. And in fact, we've designed it so when the water comes down the chute for the high flows, it's actually going to come completely over the discharge channel and fall into the river downstream. We want the discharge channel to degrade at all, and so we've designed it that way. This is a close-up, a better view of the actual concrete structure. This is the sets of gates. That's more modern here today, where you have what's called guard radial gate. Purposes wrong with the structure. You have to do close it, have the still be working. How or what's going to adjust the flow, and we could do that pretty precisely. That's what we. I'm going to turn this over for a few about some of the questions about some of the to the success of Yuba so far.
Thank you for some in some capacity for working. There 86 flood devastation is instrumental in getting and get a project 84 in the city of Marysville up for approval. The 19 step back, some improvements got authorized 84 to a 200-year. Unfortunately, about that same time, wisdom said, what else can we do? Those types of things for supplemental fees, dam improvements. Some of those are being carried forward now. They looked at levee improvements. They looked at setback levees, which we did build a few of those and all those things. And what that study concluded is that it doesn't make any sense to do any reservoir improvements until you improve the levees, because the levees were in such bad shape. So for the last 20 years, that's what we've been working on. And it's been with the assistance of the water agency that Three Rivers was so successful. The city of Marysville has been successful, nearly complete. The rural areas are now starting to move forward with design and improvement on projects. So we've come a long way with the levees. So now let's take a step back and go back to that study. And I think that's the long and the short of the story behind why we're here today. So as you guys are aware, you've been instrumental in assisting folks in the county of getting improvements to levees. Three Rivers is about $400 million of improvements, mostly state and locally funded. Marysville Ring Levees, $250 million of improvements. It's been mostly federal funded, 95% federal funding because of the work that was invested in RD 784. Started looking at Hallwood, and all of these projects we've designed and constructed to the existing conditions. So anything that the spillway or improvements to upstream reservoirs, Furo, any of those things offer are in addition to the existing conditions. So all these projects will provide protection at the existing condition. Anything else beyond that is just added benefit. So Hallwood, it's on here twice, but we did the levee and the channel improvements. So about $12 million each. And then on the other side of the river in Yuba City, on the Sutter County side, the Sutter Butte Flood Control Agency West Levee projects was about $380 million. That was mostly state and locally funded. Some of it's being constructed by the Army Corps. So you can see there's over $1 billion of levee improvements that are affected by the Arc Spillway project. So getting into the hydraulic modeling, this is a chart that shows the flow reductions, peak flow with the Arc Spillway and without the project. So the darker line is without project. And what you'll notice is going across there, there's a control of 300,000 CFS, which is the water control manual flow. We can keep that. The percentages at the bottom, those are the percentage of flow that we saw in the 1997 flood. So this is, you start with about an 80% of the 1997 flood going up to about 125%. So you can see that not much changes without project condition until you lose control at about 110% of the 1997 flood. You can see that with the spillway, basically things stay pretty close to the same. We keep it below the control until we get to about 120%. And then it's after that where things really kind of start getting crazy in the water world, and operations change from flood control operations to dam safety operations. So the whole manual gets flipped upside down, and we start really seeing some benefits. This one here is stage reductions. Now, I've been asked, why do we see less stage reduction as we move through? And that has a lot to do with holding that 300,000 CFS flow. So this is peak stage on the downstream levees. The other one was flows. So that control manual, there's just less of a difference in benefit between 300,000 and the flows that we're seeing with the spillway. So you kind of lose a little bit as you get into the 100% to the 110, 115%, but then you really start seeing big stage reduction benefits. Now I say that, but we're talking a couple tenths of a foot, which is pretty instrumental in levee world, but we're seeing greater than 2 feet of stage reduction down on the downstream levees from any of these alternatives. So that's the important part of this slide.
If I can ask a question, when we talk about the 1 in 100 and 1 in 200 underneath 85% and 115%, my understanding is the 1997 event was not a 1 in 100 year storm. It was less than that. So I'm not following, because according to this, 100% of 1997 would be somewhere between 100 and 200 year event.
The 1997 event was indeed a 100-year event when you talk about flows and stages on a levee. So when we talk about events, you either talk about a rain event, which is how much precipitation falls in a 24-hour period, or a flow event on a system. We refer to the flow event on the system, and because of the snow melt, it wasn't the rain that caused it to be a 100-year flood. It was the downstream flows coming out of the reservoirs that exceeded the 100-year level.
Gotcha. And so it wasn't even a 100-year event, it was a 150-year or something like that?
Somewhere between 100 and 150 year.
Okay, thank you.
So this is the most important graph, I think, in this presentation, and this is, the blue line is what happened in 1997 with flows and stages, and the red line is if we had the ARC spillway and FURO in place, what we could have done. So you can see you get to that big 250,000 CFS or so, and then you flatline it through the peak stage of the hydrograph and get rid of it. We're able to get rid of it early, so you can see that the red line jumps up early, flattens out at the peak, and then tails off at the end. So it would have been tremendous benefit to all downstream folks if we would have had this in place in 1990. So you're seeing this slide a lot because this is the most important thing about levees in California is the force on the levees, and the lower the water surface elevation, the less head pressure you have. And as David mentioned, it's exponential. So a couple tenths of difference is big. A couple feet of difference is huge. So reducing that under seepage gradient, you can do 2 ways. You can stop the flow from coming through, which we do with slurry walls. You can control it on the land side with seepage berms. We've constructed those throughout the county. The only other way to do it is to reduce the head pressure on the levee. And so by reducing the head pressure, you automatically reduce or increase that level of protection throughout the system. Yep.
Okay, I'll finish off the presentation, then again, feel free to interrupt me, but we'll also have time for questions. So the benefits, I think you just heard the benefits. That's the best presentation you're going to hear about the benefits of the ARC spillway. But there are some side benefits that maybe I'll highlight just a bit. First of all, redundancy. I talked about that a bit New Bullard's Bar Dam is one of the largest concrete dams in North America. Because it's one of the largest dams in North America, the consequence of failure of that dam or a component of the dam is humongous. And so we always want to be reducing the probability of failure. You have a great spillway, the spillway works, but if something unpredicted goes wrong with that spillway, we're now going to have a secondary spillway that we could shut that one down and work on this spillway and have the flows pass that way. So that's a huge side benefit that probably wouldn't have been constructed by itself, but it's a benefit in itself. Another is I mentioned that when we work with dams, we work with extreme probabilities, not these 1 in 100, 500. We're working with 1 in 10,000, 1 in 100,000, 1 in a million kind of events we're trying to prevent. And so one's called the possible maximum flood. So this is supposed to be the most theoretical high flood that can occur. That doesn't mean it can't be exceeded, but theoretically a very, very big flood. Currently, that very hypothetical flood will go over the top of the dam. And so FERC has asked us to look at that and study it, and can something be done about that particular component? This will actually fix that as well. So by putting this arc spillway, a secondary is to deal with the PMF. During the PMF, we will not have overtopping of the dam. So that's an additional benefit. Now the costs are very difficult to estimate the further out you go. And so when we initially estimated the cost, it was about $210 million. We weren't exactly too sure when this was going to start. So you could imagine if you build a major project in 2023, it's going to cost something. If you build it in 2027, it's going to cost a lot more. So when is it going to start has a major factor. What's very unpredictable is inflation, and it seems more unpredictable now than it has historically. We've had some huge inflation numbers over the last couple of years, and as a result of that, the costs could change depending on what you assume for inflation. And then finally, another important factor is when the construction starts and how the construction industry is doing at the time. So if everybody's really, really busy, the construction industry usually has a bit more higher profit. When they're looking for more work, the profit goes down. And so we had our original estimate. We had a construction manager come in. They were much more conservative on the numbers. They came in at a different number. So right now we're thinking somewhere between $210 and $290 million, or to pay a contractor to actually construct this project if it were to go in the next 2026 start date. Let's see. And the current schedule. So the design is complete. You heard me say that DSOD gave us a verbal approval. We're going to finish that up and probably get approval early in the year. Same with FERC. We've got those. We've got the CEQA document completed. In fact, permitting is started. We're ready to certify that document at any time. The other issue is waiting for FERC non-compliance, non-capacity license amendment. So right now you're going through a FERC relicensing. That takes a lot of time and a lot of money, and you're currently doing that right now. We're not going to necessarily wait for that. We're going to do what's called a FERC non-capacity license amendment. You take the existing license, you amend it for this new project. That will probably take a year or less to complete that. So the project from an engineering standpoint is ready to go. We'll get that license. You heard Willie talk a little bit about funding. That's another thing. So from a technical standpoint, the project's pretty much ready to go. So with that, I'll stop, invite questions for myself, Tom, or staff. I really appreciate the time you've given me here today. I'd also like to congratulate Yuba Water Agency as a chief of dam safety and as the deputy director of flood safe. It was always difficult to talk people into doing what's right, improving your system, go beyond what's the bare minimum. I've very much enjoyed working with Yuba Water because you seem to always want to do that. You always want to improve your system. That's pretty much your motto, and so you deserve a congratulations for that. Something I appreciate as some of my former past duties. It's nice to see that once in a while. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments or questions from any of you guys? Charlie?
Go back at one time you in your early part of the presentation, you had alternate projects. Where would we get the biggest bang for our buck? And as I remember, one of them was like the raising Oroville's emergency spillway with like 90 million and gave twice as much flood protection as our spillway.
And before, as they're getting that teed up, Director Matthews, I'd just like to let you know the intent of today's presentation was just this, is to address questions. This is your opportunity in a forum, a public forum, and with staff to go over any of the concepts or any of the proposals we've brought forward over the past several years. So these types of questions are exactly the kind of questions we want to field. So what I'm trying to do is encourage the dialogue. The intent here is in the future, when we bring a finance plan, we will have addressed the questions related to the design and the process, and then we're just talking about policy-related questions on the investment. That's the intent. Doesn't mean we can't talk in the future about technical stuff, but that's why we're here today. So, Dave.
So I had read a couple of these alternatives. There was a couple of paragraphs on Lake Oroville, why that didn't move too far forward. And some of the reasoning is, one, it's a state facility not operated by yourself, so you don't have control over that. They would have to do it. Also, water supply would be severely affected by that project, according to the analysis that was done. That doesn't mean it's not going to be looked at later. As far as I know, there's nothing on the books looking at Lake Oroville. You probably are going to be, and I think you are, actually working with Department of Water Resources right now, because your water control manuals are tied together. Because they're tied together, you can't do something on your water control manual without understanding theirs, and they're going to have to work with you, and they are doing that. And so the project that was up there about that is that's why it got left off. But I do know you all are working with DWR right now with your water control manual.
I'll take a couple of shots at that.
I'm not sure you answered the question. The question is, if we're going to spend, use a number of 300 million, we want to make sure there's not a project out there that would give us a bigger protection for the same amount of money. And I think the last time we did that study was in the 90s. But that's what I was trying to get you. How updated is that study? Is that the right way to ask the question?
I'll try to start, and then I'll have to do a little bit more research in it. So in 2001, this was part of this alternatives evaluation. You actually did another one in 2023, just very recently, where you're re-looking at everything. And so I don't know what's been updated on that study right now. I didn't study it. I can and I will. But I do know why it was taken off the books back in 2001. And it's because, one, you don't have control. You know, the state does. They're the one that would make that decision. And from a water supply standpoint, it wasn't going to be feasible to have that particular project. So that's what was in the book.
I'm not trying to argue, but
no, that's all right.
Don't we have a joint manual that ties Bullard's Bar and Oroville together? And we're updating that now?
Yes.
Whether it be, so, I mean, your idea that one's the state and one's us, I'm having trouble.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Distinguishing what you're saying.
Okay, and maybe I misunderstood the question, but in terms of operation, you very much will look at that and possibly operate Oroville differently, maybe not. You know, they have a decision to make in terms of always balancing water supply with flood control. But what I was talking about is any physical modifications to Oroville. It's taken off in 2001, as far as I know. So that's all I know. As far as the operations, you're absolutely right. It's going to be looked at. I don't know what's going to come out of that, but I know your staff's working with DWR on that.
And to supplement what Dave just said, Director Matthews, yes, we are heavily engaged with the Department of Water Resources on the update of the water control manual and the incorporation of forecast-informed reservoir operations. We will have a future presentation on those specific efforts and how they align with the ARC spillway, with what you've seen today, and then a future finance plan coming forward. So in those discussions with Department of Water Resources, Dave just said they're balancing flood control and water supply. John is the lead for the agency on that, and he's in those discussions with them. They're from our understanding in those dialogues, they aren't currently considering any physical modifications to Orville. That is off the table. Like Dave mentioned, we can influence what we control. We own and operate New Bullard's Bar. What we're bringing forward is the most feasible investment Yuba Water Agency can make to improve flood control for the people of Yuba County. We will absolutely remain at the table and have these discussions with the Department of Water Resources, but we have a limited opportunity to modify infrastructure that we don't own, but we will get the most out of those discussions with the update of the water control manual and the incorporation of FERO. So the intent is still there. We're doing everything we possibly can. And I think it's obvious, but I have to state it. The 2017 Orville spillway incident heavily influenced what they're willing to do with their physical infrastructure. So I'll just say the whole landscape at Orville and the physical infrastructure changed in 2017. So when you look at studies about, and I'll talk to these because you and I have talked about these individually, surcharging Orville Reservoir or making modifications to the emergency gate, a lot of those infrastructure investments or opportunities that were taken off the table at Orville related to their infrastructure. Theoretically, they could be done. But the likelihood of moving those forward, especially with no intent by DWR to do that, but only pressure from Yuba Water Agency, it's not likely we'll have that type of influence. The influence we do have is how the two, and you mentioned this, how the two reservoirs are operated together. That's the influence we do have.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Wayne?
Just appreciate all the discussion on the hydrostatic pressure issue. I actually hadn't heard that argument before. So, I was only thinking about being able to control flow rates. And so I appreciate that. Also the discussion about, having an alternative to the main spillway. I mean, we believe ours to be sound, but everybody thought Orville's was sound too at one time. So, the other thing that, and this is maybe more of a political discussion than an engineering discussion, but this project will protect so many other communities, or will help protect. And I know we're elected to represent Yuba County, but our levees are pretty darn good. They never can be perfect, but so many other communities downstream have lower quality levees that we're going to assist with this project. So I just think that's something to keep in mind.
So I'll respond to that comment. So yes, the ARC spillway will protect every levee within the region. The direction that staff received a few years ago when we were at somewhere around the 60% design was carry this to 100% design and start working on a funding plan. Seek external funds, and using the logic that we're not only protecting Yuba County, we're protecting the region. And when we talk to funding sources, grant sources, that's the dialogue we use, and that's the justification we use in grant applications. Now, what we will end up bringing you is a proposal that fits Yuba Water Agency's mission and strategic plan, current financing and current revenues, and to meet the needs of the people of Yuba County. We will factor in external funding sources and external benefits, but what we're not going to bring to you is something that says, if nothing from the external sources, then we don't construct this. What we're going to bring is a proposal. It'll include some funding from Yuba Water, potentially borrowing some money, and some outside grants we think we're about to receive. But we're not going to say if nothing comes from external sources, we're not going to move forward with this. However, that is definitely a policy question this board is going to have to make. That's why we're teeing up the technical discussion today, and then we'll have that policy discussion at a future date when we bring you what we see as the true cost estimate and the financing plan associated.
Through the chair.
Go ahead, Don.
Can you explain for me briefly the interaction of forecasting and how that affects the whole decision on the ARC spillway? Because in my mind, it's like a matter of hours, the window that you have to activate this.
I could, but I think John could even do it better. So let's have John answer that question.
Yeah, John James, Director of Resource Planning. So great question. So we look at it as the spillway is kind of like the hardware component, essentially the physical ability to release water at a certain level in the reservoir. And the forecast piece is knowing when to release that water. So as we're improving our knowledge of how much water is going to come into the reservoir, if we can gain an extra day or two, release water in a metered rate, something that the levees can handle, and then, like Dave was saying, knock off that peak when the actual peak of the event comes in. I mean, that can mean the difference of reaching those control points downstream or being at a point where we can manage it throughout the event. So the improvements in forecasting basically buy us time, which allows us to be more flexible in how we release the water. And the arc spillway is the physical component of that.
Yeah, it seems like a narrow window. And then, of course, you have to take into consideration what's happening downstream, whether you're going to dump a bunch of water on top of a bunch of water that's already there. So.
Yeah, and so, with that, we have specific programs that are already in place, and this is going to be a part of a future presentation, but one of the things that was recommended out of the study was to coordinate operations with Oroville and actually have a program to where each of the reservoir operators knows how much they're going to release at what given time, and then take those amounts of the release plan and understand what that would do downstream. And so that exists today, and so FERA would actually add on top of that to improve those forecasts and better operate that system between us, DWR, and the Army Corps.
Yeah, thank you. I know we've made big improvements on the forecasting, but it seems like a very critical part of the whole thing.
I'd just like to add, John just mentioned that exists today is what he said. That matter of hours portion of your question, that exists today. I mean, the risk to downstream flood-prone areas in the matter of hours exists today, but also operational protocols exist today. We have a 1972 water control manual that outlines how Oroville and Bullards are to be operated. And yes, it's not updated, and no, it doesn't include forecast-informed reservoir operations, but it does lay out the communication protocols and the planning protocols that we have since improved. The 2006 adoption of forecast coordinated operations and an actual experience, big-time experience during the 2017 event. I'm not going to say we're like expert, perfect every time we're going to nail it within minutes, but we do this now. And we do this now in events that don't even result in like a newspaper article, just high flow events. So this will only serve to improve that, for the incorporation of forecast informed reservoir operations and the update of the water control manual.
Thanks.
One other factor that the flood control manual, you alluded to it, will give us the ability to have more water, usable water in drier years.
So the factor that impacts water supply is the 170,000 acre foot flood pool. That won't change as part of the water control manual. That's the congressional authorized action in the 1960s was to establish that pool. However, the operational flexibility around that pool that currently exists today, we can get a deviation and we can encroach in that flood pool today with Army Corps of Engineers permission. What we will do in the water control manual, the future water control manual, is further solidify the protocol to gaining a deviation or flexibility in deviation in storing water in the flood. You might be referring to the wetness factor at Oroville.
The amount of flood control space is influenced by the weather year.
That's correct. That is correct. They have what they call a wetness factor. I'm not super versed in that, but basically what it is I'm going to make this up, but it's something close to this. If it's a high snowpack year and they've already received a lot of precipitation, so the ground is saturated, then they have a greater storage requirement for flood space in Oroville. If it's dry and they haven't received a lot of precipitation and there's little or no snowpack, there's more ability to store water. We don't have that. We have a fixed 170,000 acre foot flood space requirement. That won't change. Again, that was congressionally authorized. That is what it is. But the way to operate within that will be revised and updated in the future water control manual in agreement with the Army Corps. Again, we can do some of that. We can deviate and we can store water in the 170,000 acre foot flood pool today. And we did, in fact, this year, but we need to receive authorization or approval by the Corps in that water year to be able to do that.
But since we have an art spillway, we'll have better control if we go the other way. Can we get the commitment from the 170 to be more like Oroville as a commitment if we wind up building it, have the commitment before we build it?
I don't know that we'll get the commitment before we build it, but I will say that the benefit of FERO and the construction of the ARC spillway is being discussed in the update of the water control manual. And I do believe, based on those conversations, we will have more flexibility to operate within the flood pool. That may not be solidified in writing prior to us bringing you a finance package. As a matter of fact, I don't think it will be. The water control manual update will take a few more years. We will have to assume we're going to get that flexibility unless we want to delay the decision.
Without delaying it, can we push the 2-year window on the updated manual that if we do build the spillway, we will have more flexibility?
We will do everything in our power to influence the water supply benefit as we have these discussions. We're dealing with the Army Corps of Engineers, and they have mandated processes to go through in a water control manual update. I'll give you an example. They're not likely to break a precedent on how they develop a water control manual to negotiate with us water storage. They'll operate within their limits, their authorized limits, and give as much flexibility as possible. But I don't think they're going to give Yuba Water Agency anything special because we're proposing to build an additional facility at our reservoir. I think those are just facts.
They have given that to Oroville.
No,
in the manual.
That was under that's nothing new. So let's just be clear. Oroville's original water control manual from the 1970s, I think theirs was 1970, ours is 1972, included a wetness factor. So when we make a statement, they've given something to Oroville, they developed a water control manual for Oroville in 1970 that included a wetness factor. There's nothing that has transpired between 1970 and 2024 that revised that wetness factor.
But when we did ours 2 years later, they took the wetness factor out.
I don't believe there was ever a wetness factor. Now we're talking about things that negotiations and developments that happened in the late 1960s. I've never seen anything in my review of documents for New Bullard's Bar and the flood control. I've never seen anything in the development of those documents from the 60s and early 70s that discussed a wetness factor or discussed anything related to variable hydrology. The agreement for the cost share from the Army Corps was, in my review of the documents, was always 170,000 acre feet fixed.
Thank you.
All right. Any else have comments before I get into my 2 hours of comments? So one thing, I have a few things, but one is what I think would really be the biggest need for this is the 96 flood, or the 86 flood was on the Yuba River, levee failure. The 97 flood, although it was way down on the Feather River levee, there was also a levee failure in Hallwood. Most people don't know that. But the community I live in flooded because of a levee failure. It was an Army Corps of Engineers levee. They came back and replaced it on the Yuba River. So I see this would be a huge benefit for everything upstream the levee. And not only was there a levee failure in 1997, there was also significant channel erosion on the Yuba River. My property personally, we lost, 10 or 12 acres that went on down the river, both sides of the river. And that's kind of an ongoing thing that was started in 97 and continues today. And I think this would really help the entire Yuba River channel. My other thought is when you're talking about the funding of this, you just brought up with inflation and everything, if we have this thing ready, are we going to get enough grant money to offset the inflation, whether if we just said, hey, well, let's get going on this and build it ourselves and fund the whole thing? It's going to take so many years to build. The way we're bringing in income, we could probably self-fund it, and it would be paid for with what we're bringing in over the years it'll take to build it. So I just don't know if we ought to, once we have it ready, if we ought to sit back on our heels and wait for a grant that at the end of the day won't save us any money because it'll cost so much more to build that grant will really, you know. My final third comment. Why couldn't we build some giant siphon pipes over that thing for a lot less than $300 million? But I'm going to defer to you guys, know what you're doing on that. So that was it. Those are my comments.
So this is great. Let's have a dialogue about those. I think we have some things to bring up. So first off, siphon pipes were part of the value engineering. We looked at siphon pipes. We even looked at having a big tugboat with a pump on the lake that shoots water over the spillway. We looked at those types of things. Secondly, on the back to the financing, currently waiting on the grant that we're currently waiting on and other external opportunities is not the critical factor in the timing of the schedule. What my goal, and one of the reasons we're here today, is to bring something to the board such that the funding and the financing isn't the critical factor. Currently, we're still working on, now that we have 100% design, we're currently working on the environmental permitting side of things. And the next step would be to submit the FERC license amendment to FERC so we can get all the environmental approvals to construct. Now that we have 100% design done. That's still currently the critical path. Financing is not the critical path, but it's getting close. And that's why we decided, look, if you would have asked me 6 months ago, I would have been bringing you this presentation with a financing plan today, because I thought we would have a yes or no on this external grant source. But given the fact that we didn't have a yes or no, and we're still kind of waiting to hear for final approval, I said, look, we have got to get in front of our board, have this presentation, remind them of this investment we're about to ask them to make. That way, when we are ready to submit the FERC license amendment and we do bring a financing package, the financing isn't what holds the project back. So it currently isn't. I just want to be clear. It's actually the preparation of the environmental permitting, but we're getting close to the financing being the critical factor.
So I'm going to have a follow-up question on that. If we get it ready and FERC licensing and we're ready to go and we haven't gotten any external financing and we decide we're going to roll with this, once we start, could we still keep submitting for grants and hopefully get some in the, how many years is it going to take to build this thing out? 4 or 5 years?
4 to 5 years. And the answer to your question is yes, we can still submit for grants. And some grants, I'll just be very candid, some grants like the fact that you are financially viable and have the ability to construct on your own, because then they know that their funding is not going to go to waste. It's actually going to be put in the ground and be fruitful. Other grant opportunities might see the fact that this board may have approved complete funding. Maybe you might have approved a $300 million funding package, and they look at that and go, they don't need our funding, so we're not going to provide that grant. So all grant opportunities are different. What I do hear you saying, and this is kind of the sentiment of individual discussions I've had with board members, is let's not wait around. Let's bring this project to the board sooner rather than later for many factors. The primary factor is it provides a significant benefit for flood protection. That's the biggest one. The second one I've been hearing, and this is just the last couple of years, and it's obvious, is inflation is eroding away a potential grant source. That is not a joke. That is not infeasible. That's what's happening. If let's say there's a $50 million grant out there that we think we are getting, and that was 2 years ago, well, that 50 million's buying power might be, I'm going to make up a number, 40 million today. And if we wait another 2 years, it's 25 million. So at some point, I think this is to your point.
Yeah.
At some point, we just need to call the question and move forward. That's why we're here today.
It's at the end of the day, it's going to cost Yuba Water Agency the same amount of money,
right,
even if we get these grants, because we're going to sit back on our heels and wait to get the grants, and inflation's going to wipe them out. So that was my thought, and I just wanted to invite you guys that are working on this. If you ever want a tour of I'll call it the lower Hallwood portion, because you guys all know what it's like up Tykert up, but all us farmers along the Yuba River from Recology up to Tykert, I could show you a lot. I've lived there my entire life, clear back to 97. What happened in 97? I had the state out a couple months ago with the county, and they had no idea that there is an Army Corps engineer levee there along the river and that it failed in 97. So it's just something that, you know, anybody working on that. So, you know, I'm back to my point. It's not just the flood risk reduction. It's the damage to the entire Yuba River channel that this could have prevented. I think if by 97, river channel and not a levee failure, because it was overtopping. It wasn't a structural failure. It overtopped right where the levee bends. Was it? Any other questions?
Yeah.
We got a pod meeting at 10:30.
Okay. Go ahead, Wayne.
I guess after today's presentation, I'm even more convinced than I was before that.
Well, I'm not gonna
I'd just like to see this thing proceed as quickly as possible and not be a year too late getting it done. And the other thing I think that what I understand you saying, Willie, is that we're already doing is, you know, we could pay cash for this based on what we have in the bank right now, but there's no real reason to. It may not cost a lot of money to borrow and keep our cash earning money, borrow part of the money to do this with a bond. There could be a lot of advantages to do this. We can't look at this like this is a, you know, just a 1 year benefit and that has to be paid for out of the bank. We have to look at this, that this is a project that will last, I hope, 100 years. And we need to think about the benefit and cost in that context and how we pay for it in that context.
Yeah,
That's a great comment, Director Bishop, and I'll just kind of give you a little insight to the likely structure of a finance or funding plan that we'll be bringing to you in the future. What Curtis has been working on is incorporating the cost of the ARC spillway and any outside funding into our long-term 5-year budget. And like you just mentioned, yes, this is going to last 100 years or more, but also it's going to take 5 years to construct. So we are receiving revenue from our normal operations on an annual basis and theoretically can start construction on this in 2026. And if you add 5 years to that, you can look at projected revenues of 2026 through 2031. So you're paying for some of it as you go because your normal business operations are paying for it. So what we're not going to bring is a one-time, here's the cost, here's our bank account, and here's the depletion of our bank account. It will be a rolling project level proposal, and hopefully it includes outside funds. Now, when you look at outside borrowing, yes, that's another thing we're looking at. If we are truly going to consider a significant loan to something like an OPUD Wheatland wastewater line, we need to factor that into that rolling budget. So it might make sense that we look at sources of outside borrowing. What we're finding, and I don't want to get to the punchline on the borrowing thing, but what we're finding, and this is one reason Curtis went out and got a credit rating for Yuba Water Agency, but what we're finding is sale of bonds is maybe not as good as some federal funding sources that are designed for these type of investments that have low interest rates. So maybe that's where we're going to go. But we're going to work that through. We're going to populate that budget with what we think is a $50 million external grant and bring it to you. And there's going to be options for you. There's going to be options to construct and move forward with 100% Yuba Water Agency funding. There's going to be options to not do anything and say, great job, team. When the feds want to pay for 50% of it, I'm making this up completely, then we'll move it forward. Or there's going to be an option of us paying for it with rolling revenues or borrowing money. We're going to bring you some options, but we're going to bring you a recommendation as well based on what we know at the time. And we don't know all of the factors at the time, but I'm telling you some of the sideboards we're using for this finance plan. And at this time, and I'm going to put him on the spot, Curtis, if I'm off base or if you have anything to add to what I just said, please jump up and listen to that.
I would also add that the term shovel ready is the key element of what we're talking about. You have all these hurdles to jump over before you're shovel ready. And I perceive that what we're doing is getting the project shovel ready. Would that be the right way to describe it?
Yeah, that's what we're driving towards. I mean, and I'll just give you an example. We needed to get to 100% design so we know what to apply for with FERC for our license amendment. Yeah. We're there now, and that's what we're developing. Once we get the FERC amendment in, it's a 1-year process with FERC. Once we get that done and the associated permits related to that, then we are shovel ready and we have to bid it out. Now we can look at, depending on our timing of our finance plan, we can look at bidding it out while we're waiting on the FERC approvals. Now there's some strengths and weaknesses to that. One is to start as quickly as possible, but the other is if you don't have all your environmental stuff done and stamped and approved, there might be conditions and mitigation measures that you don't end up putting in the bid package that you have to account for later. So all of that is what we're balancing. And this is a highly complex project. I mean, look at what we've been talking about it since 2001. And we've spent 6 years on design. And someone might sit back and go, oh my gosh, it's taking forever. An investment like this takes forever, and we don't want to miss a step. And I'll just talk about the biggest step we made in that 6-year process was the value engineering. I mean, that probably put us back a year, just going through a value engineering design. But one, we got a cheaper project resulted or being proposed. And like Dave mentioned, we thought it would be a tunnel, and now it's an open concept spillway. So that's a major design change. But what comes with that is a long-term benefit in that the gates, the actual gates used to operate the spillway, are commonly constructed and maintained radial gates because it's an open channel spillway. If it was a tunnel, it would have roller gates, which are not as common, so not as easy to design and not at all as easy to maintain because they're underground most of the time. So look, those specific nuances are what is causing this to take so long, but an investment like this takes this long. I mean, think about New Bullard's Bar. New Bullard's Bar was the concept was looked at in the early 1950s, post-World War II, by both the state and the federal government. We ended up picking it up in the early 1960s and actually constructing it in 1966. So there's, let's call it a 15-year period back when you can actually get projects through quickly, right? And so we've taken 20 plus years to get to where we are today, another year or two of environmental permitting, and then we will be, to get back to your question, Director Matthews, shovel ready. Yeah,
the other part, maybe you would, the environmental part, just like we, whether it's the federal fish and game or those type of things, are also very critical and take time.
Yeah. We have permits. We'll have a license amendment with FERC. We will have some level of permitting with the State Water Resources Control Board, including a water quality certification under Section 401 of the Clean Water Act, and we all are familiar with that. We'll have a stream bed alteration agreement with CDFW, and potentially some type of permitting with the Army Corps, in addition to the work we're doing with the Army Corps on the water control manual, but a totally separate department. So yes, there's still a lot of permitting to get through. I think the difference here, and I'm not saying that this permitting process is going to be easy, but the difference here is it's at an existing structure. It's at New Bullard's Bar, and it has an absolute well-defined public benefit in flood control. So I think people see that. They see the political implications of that. Doesn't mean you're going to get permits any faster or better, but I think that when regulators look at it, they see the proposal and they see the benefit and they take that into account.
All right. Well, thank you. It's an excellent presentation.
So I'm not done. I know I've talked a lot, and I've been looking forward to this because there is a lot of discussion about the ARC spillway that has gone on for 6 years since we started to design it. I want to give you specifically what we're going to do next. I know we've talked about it in chunks as we've gone along this morning, but just to be clear, staff was authorized in 2018 to spend up to $11-something million to do design, engineering, and environmental permitting. Curtis has included in our budgets the last couple of years additional funds to move forward. We're a little over the 11 million authorized, but that's. And what I want to be clear on is I'm interpreting the authority we got in 2018 to do design and engineering and permitting as the general manager has the authority to submit the environmental permit applications. So we're going to move forward with that. That includes the amendment to FERC. There's a few other regulatory things that relate to our FERC license. Submit that license amendment, but I'm not going to bring back the license amendment to you for approval before we submit. I'm just telling you we'll likely submit that in the next couple months. GEI and Dave's team will continue to work on the design and be available. Tom's team has worked on the hydrology, and they'll be available for any of the questions as we go through environmental review. John will continue to work on the water control manual and FIRO, and we will bring you an update, detailed update on that. I know today's presentation wasn't intended to talk specifically on FIRO and the water control manual. We did a little bit, but we'll bring you a more detailed update on that effort. And then finally, I think most importantly, Curtis and team and I will bring you this finance plan. And I'm thinking in the next couple of months. My goal was in this calendar year. I'm still kind of sticking to that goal, and maybe shortly after the first of the year. But that's our plan. I just wanted to be very clear on what direction you've given staff and what we're planning to do in the next couple of months. And this is, kind of touching on Director Bishop's kind of comment there. So that's what we're doing.
Perfect. Manager's report.
Still want to hear from you. So I think the most fun thing to talk about in the manager's report is, throughout the water year, I talk about our end of year carryover target. And unless we're in a drought year where that varies, it's 650,000 acre feet of storage in New Bullards Bar Reservoir at the end of the water year. And that's September 30th, which was yesterday. So I walk in the office this morning in preparation of putting the report together, and I get the email that says where New Bullards Bar is, and we're at 649,787 feet. And I went into John's office and slammed the report on his desk, and I said, "You missed it by, 213 feet. I can't believe you." So I think we did pretty well. It's just a joke. It's fun. We nailed it. We're at 650,000 acre feet. I think John said, there is not a more average year than this water year. It's very uncommon to have a water year like this, but it was not a flood year. It was not a drought year. If we could have years like this, it would make our job so much easier because it was just perfectly average year. So all is well at New Bullards Bar. Narrows 2 was out on annual outage in the month of September. They brought it back yesterday, tested it, and returned it to service yesterday afternoon. All went well there. The main bypass, the big full flow bypass associated with Narrows 2 was also worked on over the last month, and we've had some issues with that not operating perfectly. And I have in a report here, it's operated perfectly yesterday. So I don't know what that exactly means. Is they can operate perfectly every time we want it to, hopefully, but that was good news. It's returned to service as well. The Colgate unit number 1 outage starts here in a week or so. It's scheduled for the month of October. Otherwise, all of our normal routine recreation and fleet type work continues on. With the weather, it is kind of hot for early October this week. And not only is it hot, John's reporting that there's kind of the extreme fire weather, late season fire weather conditions occurring this the later part of this week, primarily in the coastal mountain range, but maybe a little bit up in the Feather River watershed. So I don't want to say this is kind of like campfire type weather, but that's the type of system that's set up, the dry north winds in hot conditions. So just want you to be aware of that. That might cause public safety power shutoffs. Probably they're not forecast in our watershed or our region, but throughout the state, PG&E may be implementing those. Just wanted to give everyone a heads up that we do monitor that, and you're out in those areas, you might experience that. Kind of same stuff with La Nina conditions coming up. On the communications update, after our last board meeting, we received coverage in the Appeal Democrat for the MOU signing and the Accord extension. The MOU signing was also picked up by the CBS affiliate in Chico and the Camptonville Courier. The Accord extension was picked up by KFBK Radio in Sacramento, and the plan for a biomass plant continues to get coverage from Niche Media. Climate Connections radio program, which is heard on radio stations all over the country and on the web, featured Blue Forest talking about the forest resilience bonds, and we got a great shout out in that story for our partnership with them. Last week, we were notified that our communication efforts, this is a great congratulations. I'm sorry, DV, I started it without emphasizing it. Last week, we were notified that our communication efforts around the water conservation kits this year were selected as a finalist for Aqua's Huell Hauser Excellence in Communications Award. So we're nominated for that. We will see at the Aqua conference if we, in fact, receive that award. But let's congratulate the comms and the team that worked on that conservation, water conservation effort. Over the weekend, both Director Messick and our watershed manager, Joanna Lassard, spoke at the Food and Water Festival up in Oregon House. We also had a booth at that event Saturday. Upcoming sponsorships include the Pink October Walk and the Casa de Esperanza benefit concert on Saturday and the Sierra Fund Tribal Summit next week. The Marysville High School Pride Dinner on the 12th, and we will have a booth at the county's Be Prepared Fair on October 10th. October 5th through 13th is California Water Professionals Appreciation Week. And lastly, we have a mailer going out for Flood Preparedness Week to all of the homes in the valley. They are mailing out on the 15th, so watch for it in your mailbox. We also have a lot of additional copies in the office for you to share. I'll tell you, this mailer that the communications team put together is amazing. It's professional. It's the right messaging. So those of you that live in the valley, look for it. You all live in the valley, so you'll see it. If not, we will have extra copies at the office. The next board meeting is on October 15th. And I just want to say, today's board meeting was lengthy. There was a lot of dialogue. A lot of that dialogue was prompted by me, and it was intentional because this is one of the biggest investments this agency's contemplating since 1966. I think it's important. I think it's important for you to hear from us in a very transparent and clear way. I think it's important for you to be able to ask questions, whether they're super technical or super obvious or policy or budget related. And I want you to know, between now and the day we call the question on the construction of the Ark Spillway, I want you to ask me what additional information you need from us to be able to make this significant policy decision. I just want to thank you for the amount of dialogue we have, the trust that you have with staff to bring you answers to your questions, and we're happy to continue to do that. And like I said, we'll have a FERO and water control manual update and a funding plan update in the next couple months. Thank you.
Thank you. Director's reports. I'm gonna start off to kind of add to that real quick. In our agenda setting, we contemplated whether to have the pod at 10:30, thinking this might go later, but maybe it would end in time for us to start the pod committee at 10:30. And we decided if this meeting goes over, we can start pod late, but if it was shorter, we couldn't start pod early because it's a public meeting, and we didn't, a bunch of us are in harvest. We didn't want to have to sit over there and wait. So our pod committee meeting's obviously going to start a little late, but as soon as we get there, it will get going, and that's the reasoning we scheduled it for 10:30. So anyway, I just wanted to let you guys know that. So I'll start down on this side. Director Bishop.
I just wanted to thank the Water Agency again for the Way Off sponsorship. And I know I saw 3 of you down there on Saturday, and we had a successful event. Most exciting part of it for me was we had 15 kids enter the contest, and we hope to keep growing that part of it and educating youth about agriculture.
What was the winning weight?
Winning weight, I think, was 2,465 pounds, I think was the number. That pumpkin was grown in Oregon and missed the Oregon state record by 16 pounds.
Charlie?
I would like to commend Director Bishop that he's put Yuba County and Wheatland on the map. I have cousins in Marin County that brought their little kids up, and from all over they come, and he has done more to put us on the map than most people could realize. Also, I'd like to commend the agency and the people. This Ark Spillway is going to be the biggest decision we ever make. I can't visualize how much money we're committing, but I'm also very much like Mr. Bishop, is that this is our mission. If it's going to help flood control, the idea whether it's a 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000, you read the papers of 2 feet of rain in one day in parts of Tennessee, you never realize what could happen. So this 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000, they call the Tennessee a 1 in 1,000 year event. So I would not like to ever be told that I was against flood control and people got flooded.
Thank you. Gary?
Yeah, a couple things. So First of all, great presentation today. I know I didn't have any comments or questions, but I thought it was extremely thorough and extremely valuable. And I also appreciated the video at the beginning. I think that'll be super helpful in communicating to the public the importance of this project and why we're doing it. Early last week, Willie and I had the opportunity at the invite of the general in charge of Air Combat Command to go back to Virginia and talk with him about a future mission at Beale Air Force Base. And I think those meetings went extremely well. And so that was a great opportunity to do that and support the community in that way. It's already been mentioned, but it was a great pumpkin weigh-off, multiple events associated with that, including the growers' reception on Friday night, the dinner on Saturday night, and the actual weigh-off on Saturday. And I saw fellow directors at all those events. And so it's great to see you there. And I was honored to give the welcome to both on behalf of the county and the water agency at both the growers' reception as well as the awards dinner. And then just one last thing, this Saturday from 4 to 8 in Plumas Lake at Ufe Wood Park is the second annual, or maybe I think third annual Oktoberfest. So you can come out. There's going to be a beer garden, live music, vendors. I know Yuba Sheriff and Linda Fire will be out there as well. So should be a great event and a cornhole tournament too. So
Thank you.
And I am going to wear my lederhosen again. Yes. So.
Andy? Yes? Don? Seth? Yes, okay. Well, I had a very busy weekend at the Food and Water Festival. I was, as Willie said, I gave a speech, but on Saturday, they conned me into being in the dunk booth, and at least one person couldn't hit the thing, so ran up and dunked me by hand. So it's on video somewhere. I'm waiting to get that. Yeah. Several other people did it too. I'm not a very fast learner, so by the time Marika got there, I was slid back so she couldn't dunk me without hitting him with a baseball. It was a fun time, and I hope they made a lot of money by me sitting up there. So went to the airport 75th anniversary that morning, and Hogs and Hulas that night. Did a flyover for Hogs and Hulas that I hope they appreciated. It was a lot of fun.
Hogs and Hulas greatly appreciated the flyover.
Okay, great. That's about all I can think of right now. I'm in the middle of harvest, and so a little bit behind. I apologize for not making the way off or the dinner or anything else, but my crew consists of a bunch of 16-year-olds, so it's like herding cats out there on the ranch right now. So couldn't make it down there. Sorry. That's it. Okay. Well, meeting's going to adjourn, and we're going to head on over for pod at F Street.
Yuba-Sutter.live's local government live streams are presented by Plumas Lake Self-Storage in Plumas Lake, where lifelong local residents are helping other residents keep things safe, providing indoor storage units, outdoor RV and vehicle parking, moving supplies, and Penske truck rentals. Details at plumaslakeselfstorage.com.
Thinking good vibes one day at a time. At Edible Memories, life is sublime. In every bite, you'll find a dream. Join us now, let your heart beat. Step inside, sharing the fun. Edible Memories Bakery, where happiness runs.
Edible Memories Bakery, 321 3rd Street, Marysville. EdibleMemoriesBakery.com.
In the morning light, the cameras start to roll. Yuba-Sutter.live, watch the stories unfold. Tune in on Tuesday, the news comes alive. Yuba Agency, making sure we thrive. Yuba City Council, with Marysville in view. Yuba-Sutter.live, it's the truth that comes through. Tune in on Tuesday, the news comes alive. Yuba Agency, making sure we thrive. Yuba City Council, with Marysville in truth that comes through. Yuba-Sutter live. It's the truth that comes through. In the heart of the valley, we rise so bright, where the news flows freely in the morning light. Yuba-Sutter live, where truth comes alive. Every Tuesday's a journey, it's where we thrive. Watch it unfold. Yuba-Sutter live, in the heart of our home. Be informed, be wise. Yuba-Sutter lives. We capture it all. Policy debates, hear the people's call. With Yuba-Sutter live, you'll never miss a beat. Special reports hit hard, shining a spotlight. Yuba-Sutter live. In the morning light, the cameras start to roll. Yuba-Sutter live. Watch the stories unfold.